Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention system characteristics. We'll be discussing zero-day attacks, monitoring for attacks, intrusion prevention and detection systems, and finally looking at advantages and disadvantages of the IDS and IPS. This episode is part of my series on network security. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. Zero-day attack is a cyber attack that tries to exploit software vulnerabilities that are unknown or undiscovered by a software vendor. The term zero-day here describes the moment when a previously unknown threat is identified. And so what a threat actor does is they find a vulnerability that hasn't been found before, and they plan their attack, they set it up, and so nobody knows that this vulnerability exists and that this threat actor created an attack to exploit that vulnerability. And then when they attack using that vulnerability, that's the zero-day. Zero-day vulnerabilities, they can cause lots of havoc. Here's the little timeline that was used for a Microsoft Internet Explorer zero-day vulnerability. As you can see right here, the vulnerability was discovered by a threat actor. They figured out how to exploit it, and then what they did is they created some malware to do that exploitation. And so the malware here was released into the wild, onto the internet here on day zero. So that's where the idea of the zero day is. And then it took 16 days before the first antivirus signature was made to stop that, to identify that. So for over 2 weeks, this malware could do this exploitation out on the internet. Intrusion detection systems are implemented to passively monitor for the traffic on the network. What we're talking about here is, here in our setup, we have a switch, and what this switch does here on step one is it copies all traffic. And so what happens is it copies traffic over here to this intrusion detection sensor. This sensor then can alert you that there's a problem, but because we copied it to the intrusion detection system, it also forwarded on to the targeted computer, and it was able to do its exploit, it was able to do its vulnerability because of that. Now, a better solution here is to use a device that can immediately detect and stop that. And that's what an intrusion prevention system is, IPS. An intrusion prevention system performs that type of function. As we look at intrusion prevention systems and intrusion detection systems, they have some common characteristics. Now, both technologies, they are deployed as sensors. So they look at the traffic coming into them, and they sense, they look at for patterns matching signatures, and they are sensing if the traffic is poor. Both technologies also use signatures to detect these patterns of misuse in the network traffic. And finally, both of these technologies can detect atomic patterns or a single packet. Atomic patterns are a single packet, or they can detect composite patterns, multi-packets. How these intrusion prevention systems work here is, first, the malicious traffic is sent to the host computer. So our threat actor is sending malicious traffic here. Then the traffic is routed into the network and then received by the IPS, the intrusion prevention system enabled sensor, where it's blocked. So the IPS here blocks this malicious traffic before it hits your network. Now, the IPS enabled sensor sends logging information regarding that traffic to the network security management. So we send information here to the management console. Hopefully it'll alert you that there was a malicious attack or some malicious activity was trying to get onto your network. Also, the IPS enabled sensor, so that's your IPS system right here, it kills the traffic. It's sent to what a lot of times is called the bit bucket, where they just send it off there. And technically what really happens is it just deletes that data. as we start comparing IDS and IPS, intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems, both of them have their distinct advantages and disadvantages. Looking here at an IDS solution. So right here's our IDS. Some of the advantages here is there's no impact on the network. Because it just copies that data to another place, we don't have to go through and process that. There is no network impact if the sensor fails. Because we're just copying that data off and then we're looking at the signatures and we're comparing it. If that sensor fails because it's not in the mainstream of the traffic, if that fails, our network isn't impacted. And finally, no network impact if the sensor is overloaded. If too much malicious traffic is coming in, because we're just copying that data off, that sensor can get overloaded and it won't slow down your traffic. Now, the disadvantages of an intrusion detection system is the response action cannot stop it because we're copying that data to our sensor. The normal traffic still continues on to its destination. You got to do some correct tuning here. You got to go in there and make sure those settings match your network setup. And finally, one of the last disadvantages here, it's more vulnerable to network security evasion. So looking at that, there are processes that can evade an intrusion detection system. And so you need to be aware of that. Now, when we talk about the IPS, the intrusion prevention system, down here, advantages, it can stop the trigger packets, those packets that will start that attack. Finally, it can use stream normalization. It can look at making sure your stream continues to go through and only the affected traffic gets stopped. Disadvantages. Sensor issues might affect the network because it's in line with your traffic flow. If there's an issue with your sensor, it could disrupt that traffic flow. Also, same thing with sensor overloading. If that sensor gets overloaded because it's in the main line of your traffic getting onto your network, if it gets overloaded, that could impact your traffic. And because of those two, we're going to have some sort of impact on our network. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on IDS and IPS characteristics. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and depending upon the platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on network security. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I picked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode of my series on network security. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.